Chapter 42. The day after that exciting night, I met back up with my squad. Of course, seeing Umara again was fun. It was like I was teasing her with every glance I gave her, just the two of us aware of what was different. I had a smile on my face all day while she tried to remain as inconspicuous as possible. Part of me just wanted to go up and give her a kiss on the cheek, just to embarrass her. But I held myself back. Although I hadn't grown up in this world, enough time and interaction had made me understand that social customs weren't the same as America on Earth. Everyone was generally more reserved and modest, more so resembling 20th century America rather than the 21st century. This meant that there wouldn't be any sex after the third date. Hell, I wouldn't be surprised if we barely started kissing by that point. I understood that everything would move slower. Not that this changed the way I thought about things. From my experience, I was used to things moving much faster. While I was willing to wait for things like sex, I wasn't sure if I had it in me to do something like wait until marriage, even though according to my own religious belief system, that was the standard. At the very least, I would be pushing our intimacy forward as best I could. That was simply the way I did things. Before all that though, we would need to have our first date. Which, considering the circumstances, wouldn't be easy. There really wasn't much to do on this military base, especially not alone. The recreation room always had people in it and I wasn't interested in having our date in a room full of sweaty nights. There weren't any restaurants, clubs, or any other fun places to go either. In fact, the best candidate for a date given the bare requirements was probably the chapel. So unless we went AWOL, sneaking onto the rail and going back to the city, having a date would be close to impossible. However, after some thinking, I realized that not all hope would be lost. There was still one activity that could give us both alone time and a good location. Missions. After the sudden siege, a few days were spent simply recuperating. Shockingly, there were 0 deaths during that time, though there were a few critical injuries like some severed limbs. But it ended very well, all things considered. And afterward, the cleanup was taken care of swiftly. So I spent most of my free time with my squad, all of us just hanging out and having fun. We would also find other squads to play games with, and on the training grounds there was frequent sparring ongoing. I also spent a lot of time studying my formation. That alone took up 3 to 5 hours of my day since I would get so engrossed. But eventually we were put to work. When the second week of our stay started, there was a large list of missions suddenly posted. Like that, all the elite squads were called to report early in the morning. So the night before, we all went to bed eagerly. "You have your armor prepared?" Fidon asked from across our room. I could see him preparing all his own gear with familiarity. Fidon wore a full set of armor, but he also had some special items like recovery pills similar to what I used to carry. Since I had very little to prepare, I just nodded. "Yay, I'm good." "Do you even have armor?" "Yay, it's my coat." "That thing?" He looked at the coat hanging on the corner of my bed with curiosity. It looked like a normal black coat unless you inspected it closely and found the purple lines. So to most people, I just really liked the coat and wore it all the time. Not that it was a false assumption, but the main reason I wore it was for its protection. But I didn't need people knowing how amazing it was. Even I didn't completely understand how high quality it was. So I gave him a succinct answer. "I can't wear heavy armor like you guys, so that coat acts as light armor." "I see. What about your feet and head?" "I have boots. As for my head, I can't say I really have anything for it. Plus, I need my eyes for my weapons, so no helmets." "Makes sense." Fidon nodded. He had seen my weapons, so he generally knew that my sight was important when working with them. After that, Fidon went back to preparing his gear. I, on the other hand, started messing with my aerial. Before leaving, San had given me some special instructions. First, I needed to access the web. And second, I needed to test out the local communication functions. The second part was easy. With a press of the button I could turn my aerial into a local node and allow anybody nearby to share communications with each other. Under normal circumstances you had to be connected to a city's node in order to send messages, but since my aerial became that, I could act as the server for everyone in my group. It would be great for our mission. Not only that, but I could contact someone back at base if we were ever in trouble since my aerial had a much longer range than normal one. It was the first part, accessing the web, that proved to be more difficult. Simply getting there was easy. There was the equivalent of an app on the aerial that brought me to a rudimentary browser. I could search for and access nodes from there. The issue was actually finding a node to connect to. There wasn't much of a search engine yet, so sifting through nodes was like looking through a phone book. I had actually started going through them during my free time. While doing so I saw many interesting nodes. Most of them required some kind of authorization to access. But shockingly, this didn't prevent me from accessing them. I could only assume that my aerial had some advanced permissions because I directly bypassed the authorization process every time. Because of that, I actually managed to view the Magisterium's node that held hundreds of research documents and information. I didn't go through it all but did indeed stash the name of the node for later. There were many others just like it, including some shady private nodes that I didn't care to stick around in. But above all these, I kept an eye out for my main target. And while Phyland went to bed, I actually found it. Black Spider Repository. I mumbled while clicking to access the node, and without delay, I was allowed access. A website appeared in front of my eyes, one with several different pages that ranged from forums to the big list of bounties. I went straight to look at the bounties, and sure enough, I found myself on there. Below my portrait was the 40,000 coin bounty as well as my personal details. But below that was a page dedicated to information on my whereabouts. There wasn't much on that page other than the fact that I had left the Magisterium for a trip. Beyond that, it was blank. It felt weird looking at a bounty for myself. Part of me was fearful, remembering just how dangerous my time in the city would be. I really couldn't let my guard down, but I wasn't sure how I was supposed to be eternally vigilant. Thankfully there wouldn't be much attention on me when I went back since I would have been gone for so long. I couldn't imagine that someone would risk their life to kill a supposed authority 5 for a mere 40 gold bullion. With a sigh, I scrolled past my portrait. There was no use worrying about that stuff now. I looked at the others, primarily the bounties with the highest payouts listed at the top. And I saw some interesting names. Anderson, an Authority 11 Paladin of the Church. Luna, the head of the Polaris family, Authority 10+. Gunson, headmaster of the Clockwork Association, Authority 9+. Patriarch Tavera 2. Seems everyone famous as a bounty. I chuckled as I saw a name I knew. The topmost bounties had rewards of billions of coin. It was enough to live the rest of your life lavishly, but it was arguable that there was no amount of money in this world that could buy the death of some of these people. How many people could kill an Authority 11? There were probably a handful of people within the kingdom, and even less who would be willing. So basically, these rewards were just trophies that those people could flaunt, like an ego boost. People like myself would be in far more danger since we could actually be killed. After scrolling for a while, I no longer saw any names that I recognized. While I got a good read on some faces, some of which were very pretty women, I mainly just snooped around for the hell of it. However, when going through some of the other pages, I saw another interesting list. It was a bounty list, but instead of for humans, it was for scourge beasts. I looked at the link to the page for a bit before clicking it. I was morbidly curious, so I didn't hesitate to find the top of the list. And the number 1 spot made me confused. The 4 Kings. I was a single bounty for 4 individuals. I scrolled through the details and saw their names. King of Anarchy. King of Despair. King of the Brood. King of Unholy Light. These were the titles of the 4 strongest beings of the Scourge. Each of them stood at the pinnacle of power, Authority 12, and had lived for hundreds of years. They were each terrifying existences. There were no pictures of them, and there wasn't even a bounty posted. But there were some details about their power, or at least the consequences of their presence. The most eye-catching was the king of unholy light. It was said that all who stood within the light emitted by this king would be melted where they stood and turn into an unrecognizable monster known as a flesh bug. These flesh bugs would then seek out the nearest human, and upon contact would melt the victim and turn it into an identical flesh bug. The most horrifying part about this wasn't the transformation though. It was the fact that, when a flesh bug would seek out a human target, it would mysteriously acquire the memories of that human and begin speaking with the voices of those its target knew and loved. It would come to you with the voice of your lover, child, or best friend. And with your memories it would try and tempt you toward it while hunting you from the dark. Because of this, there were accounts of soldiers going insane from the horror and trauma of encountering these flesh bugs. And it was said that a siege of these monsters would hail an unholy symphony of screams that drowned out entire valleys. Simply reading about this beast made me shiver, and I quickly remembered that this was just one of the 4 kings. I didn't end up reading any information about the other 3, forcing myself to scroll past the bounty before staring up at the ceiling with my eyes wide open. To say that I wasn't scared was a lie. But I found comfort in the fact that the kingdom of Dragon Tongue was able to hold its ground against these horrifying creatures and survive till this day. There were people out there so powerful that they could fight on the same level as those kings. They were keeping us safe. This was all I could tell myself to try and drown out the horror from those stories. Because I knew that, if anything, those stories were watered down from reality. After several minutes, I finally regained myself. But I found that I wasn't able to close my eyes, so I pulled back up the site and started scrolling further down the list. The beasts lower down weren't nearly as terrifying. They had pictures and there was much more detailed information. I read intently, compiling information on dozens of different beasts of different types and levels before coming to a conclusion. There were in fact intelligent beasts among the scourge. And those beasts didn't come from infecting humans. There were bloodlines within the scourge, and there were different levels for these bloodlines. The ones most prevalent were the royal bloodlines. There were 4 of them, and each descended from the 4 kings. In fact, those with these bloodlines weren't really beasts. They were humanoid creatures with intelligence and special powers. They could cultivate power just like humans, but in general were more powerful at the same authority. An Authority 6 royal wouldn't lose to an Authority 6 human, regardless of type. It took very talented humans to fight on par with royals, and the only saving grace was that there weren't many royals. At least, there weren't many worth concerning over. The limits of a royal was purely dictated by their bloodline density, which fell off with each generation. This meant there was a strict hierarchy that frequently cycled itself at the lower levels and almost never changed at the higher levels. Other than that, there were unique beasts. These were creatures without a royal bloodline that ascended beyond standard limits to attain both intelligence and strong powers. Some of them even birthed their own families and bloodlines. I saw many of both types of these creatures on the bounty list. Because of that, I now knew the identifying features of a royal and what to look out for with a unique beast. At some point, I logged out of the node and shut down my aerial. In the darkness I stewed in my own thoughts, thinking about what I learned. It was a shock to know that there were obscenely powerful beasts out there, ones that could annihilate entire cities simply by being there. And then there were the royals and unique beasts, enemies that I would probably end up facing sometime in the future. Looking at them and hearing about their powers had me fearful. It was difficult to believe that I could actually rise to their level, let alone kill them. But my own powers gave me confidence. And when I thought about the threat they pose and the devastation they've caused, I became more angry than cowardly. They needed to be eradicated. Every last one of them were monsters undeserving of their life on this world. I was already sure before, but it seemed that with everything I learned, I was only becoming more certain of my conviction to fight these monsters. So for a while I laid on my bed, smoldering in hate that drowned out any fear I had for the scourge. And it was only late in the night when I finally managed to fall asleep. Chapter 43 *************************************************************************************************************************************************************************************************************************************************************************************************************************************************************************************** A confused sound escaped my lips as I heard the echoing calls of a bird. The lush greenery around me didn't seem out of place even though it wasn't there when I fell asleep. Or, I thought it was greenery at first, but when I stepped forward to walk around a tree, I took a glimpse at the blue bark of the tree trunk and the purple grasses that rose up to my knees. I stared at it for a moment before drifting through the forest around me, making my way forward as if I knew where I was going and wasn't in a completely unfamiliar place. Or perhaps someone was guiding me. It felt like my steps weren't intentional, like a boat without sails being led by the currents underneath it. I was led out of the forest, the trees and brush coming to a halt all at once as I reached the end. The knee-high grass drew a perfect line across the landscape I gazed upon, going from tall to dirt. The mud I stepped in did nothing to dirty my shoes, but when I looked at it, I saw that it wasn't brown, but red. And it wasn't mud. My vision focused, seeing a few brown patches where the blood had yet to coat. The scent of iron suddenly filled my nose, making me so nauseous that I fell to my knees and vomited. Cough. What I vomited, I didn't know. All I knew was that I fell to the floor with a miserable feeling in my stomach. However, I could only remain there for a few seconds before everything suddenly changed again. The blood-soaked mud disappeared. What replaced it was a deep black filament, like the ground was made of metal shavings and gunpowder. My fingers could slip into it, but it also fell apart easily, coating my hands in ashy dust that couldn't be removed. For some reason, I wiped my face right after, smearing it all over my forehead, cheeks, and eyes. Some got in my nose as well, but I didn't feel like sneezing. Then, I lifted my head. I saw nothing. No land formations like hills or plains, and no blue sky. It was night, but with no stars. The landscape I stood upon was a perfectly flat plain made of black filament. There wasn't even any wind, no humidity either. After only a few seconds, my mouth became dry. Then, as I stood there with no direction, I felt a small vibration in the ground. It traveled up the soles of my feet and shook my legs. At first I thought it was similar to the purrs of a cat, a gentle and low vibration. But it didn't stop, and over time, it jumped in intensity. It soon sounded like the growls of a tiger or lion. Then it got loud, sounding like a jackhammer that caused earthquakes. After that, all I could hear was screaming that shook the skies and ground, threatening to throw me off my feet. My heart rate skyrocketed. It felt like I was fighting for my life even though I couldn't see the enemy. It felt like something was coming, yet just its mere presence in the area was sowing havoc and chaos. I got angry, irrationally so. It felt like I needed someone, something, to appear in front of me so I could kill it. And then, I felt something behind me. So I turned around with a twisted face, a low battle cry escaping my lips as I prepared myself for battle. But what I saw instantly washed away all feelings of wrath or battle. It was an ugly being. Its amalgamated torso carried 6 arms with no symmetry, as if they were sewn randomly across its body. It also had 4 legs, one of a lion, one of a lizard, and 2 hind legs with talons. And it had 2 heads, one of a human, and one of what I could only describe as a pile of flesh. The human head had no eyes and a mouth sewn shut. It only had 2 slits for a nose and many more scars that twisted its visage. And the mound of flesh had 6 eyes and 3 mouths, each mouth having 2 tongues. It was a horrible sight, and just gazing upon it induced catastrophic fear that made my eyes bleed and legs shake in weakness. But I didn't buckle. That was because, just when I felt so weak that I couldn't so much as stand, a pair of arms reached out from behind. They hugged my chest, helping me stay on my feet and wash away the fear inside me. It felt so comforting, like the embrace of a mother. My mind turned clear with its power, and yet when I continued to stare at that abomination in front of me, I still felt deep fear. I knew that I couldn't kill it. Despite the courage that I mustered to so much as face it, I knew that it was impossible to harm it. So I spoke to the being behind me. My guardian angel. I need strength, I said, yet I knew I asked. And perhaps I wasn't surprised by its response. You need fortitude, she told me in a sweet, unwavering, kind voice, and yet I laughed. I chuckled even while gazing at that abomination. But within me, I could already feel sorrow for something that hadn't happened. And then, my eyes opened. John. I looked up, seeing the ceiling as well as Fiden's concerned face to the side. He turned away when he noticed me looking over. Then, I felt a bit of moisture, lifting my fingers to my eyes to find tears. Part of me wanted to act confused, but I knew what I had just seen and felt. I couldn't deny it, even if it was a dream. So I just sat up, the room filled with an awkward silence I didn't care to acknowledge. I sat there for several minutes as Fiden dressed himself in his armor. I didn't move to do anything, simply thinking. That was, until Fiden finished and spoke. Our briefing is in an hour. Are you coming to eat? Yay. I'll be right out. All right. Take your time. I could hear the attempted comfort in his words as he left. Soon enough, I was all alone. After another several minutes, I suddenly took out the parchment, looking at all the complicated lines written on it. I had already comprehended a quarter of it. And now that I looked back, I hadn't even used the white crystal to power that advancement. It simply happened, but then again, what changed wasn't technically my overall power level, but how the power was constructed and utilized. Along with the parchment, I retrieved the white crystal Maxwell had given me. Then, I began circulating it. Closing my eyes and becoming aware of my aura, I cast Psyche into it and empowered it. Then, blue lines started appearing in the air. They sparked, shooting across space and copying the formation in my hands. At first they drew short lines, but after only 3 tries, I managed to draw the entire first quarter of the formation in mid-air. I opened my eyes, seeing the partial formation, before expanding it. The empty circle that was my unfinished formation began to fill up just a little bit more. And the spark within my mind grew that much more. The spark was entirely focused on building more of the formation, and with each second that the formation grew, the spark received more power to use for its focus, creating a positive feedback loop. I rode that wave, pushing it further and further, even treading into territory I hadn't yet gotten to, comprehending it on the fly. But then, I suddenly stopped. Taking a long breath, I looked at the formation that was now 40% complete. In fact, I had stopped on purpose when I actually had more in me. I simply felt like I should. I felt like pushing these moments of inspiration too far would burn me out. Not only that, but it would tire me before the mission. It was great progress and almost effortless. With a small smile, I took my gains and went. Stashing the parchment and crystal, I stood from my bed and wiped what remained of the dried-up tears on my face. After that, I cleaned myself up and dressed before heading out. John. After entering the mess hall, I heard Tana call me. She was sitting with the rest of my squad, so after going to grab food, I went over and sat with them. Umara was sitting on one end, so there was an open spot next to her which I cleanly took. I had a feeling she did it on purpose. I tapped her with my elbow as I sat and glanced at Fiden. He smiled at me, which I returned before focusing on eating. We were all silent for a while. After all, we didn't have much time. Time to go. After several minutes, Vetsman suddenly spoke and stood with an empty tray. I followed, stuffing the last of my food in my mouth. The others came behind us, and before long, we all headed toward the briefing room. At the entrance, the puppet master was waiting. I greeted him as we went through the door. "Good morning, Mr. Puppet." "John. I hope you're rested." We shook hands before I grabbed a seat at the table in the room. As soon as everyone had greeted each other, we all settled in. Along with the puppet master, there was also our commander along with one other officer. "All right, listen up." The commander spoke as the room went dark. Then, the wall in front of us flashed before displaying a magical projection of a map. It was of the surroundings beyond the base. There were some markers as well as indicators for geological features. "You are the first team we're sending out on a mission. This man here is Lieutenant Captain Hammett, an Authority 6 warlock. He'll be following you all and overseeing the mission. I'll allow him to explain the details." "Good day, you all. You can just address me as Sir Hammett." The officer waved to us. He was an average height man with a slim build dressed in some light armor. He seemed friendly enough with his combed back hair, so we all nodded back to him. Then, he pointed to the map behind him. "Our mission today is to do some reconnaissance. These scourge tides are by no means random. There is usually an entity guiding them, usually using the tide in order to test whatever base they siege. Our goal is to find that entity, or at least its traces. If we can't find it or at least confirm its departure, then there may be a risk of another tide. Sir Hammett has come from the nearby frontier bastion Givalda. Turns out, they've also experienced a scourge tide, and not one on a level ours could compare to. It seems we caught its remnants, but that also means the leading entity could be around here, so he will be your guide and you will support him." Commander Bosnin chimed in after, giving us a little more context. News that we weren't the only ones to get sieged surprised me, primarily because I felt that we should have been warned. I figured it was safe practice to warn any bases in the vicinity of a scourge tide, just in case. While the alarm did in fact go off some time before the tide arrived, it definitely took longer than that for the tide to travel. Then again, perhaps I was thinking too much. It wasn't like a base that was getting besieged could keep track of every enemy, especially when the forces they faced were apparently so much greater than what appeared on our own doorstep. I guess we should just be thankful that we had any advance notice at all. Sir Hammett spoke. "We will take a crawler out to the entity's most likely location, which is this hillside right here. There are a few other places around there to check out if that doesn't give us anything, including a forest nearby. This operation will take an entire day. We won't be getting back until late at night, and depending on our results, we will continue tomorrow. Also, be prepared to fight. There may be small groups of beasts that continue to lurk, so this won't just be a sightseeing trip. Any questions? What supplies should we grab?" I raised my hand and asked. If we would be outside the wire all day, then we would at least need food. He nodded at my question. "I suggest grabbing some rations, enough for 2 days. Since we'll be in a crawler, there will be some cargo space to store packs. Otherwise, just bring anything you'll need to take care of basic necessities. There are no special requirements for this mission, and I will be bringing medical supplies just in case." "Understood. Then go ahead and pack. We leave in 15 by the gate." Dismissed. With his word, we all stood to leave. All the rations were stored by the mess hall, so we stopped by there to grab supplies. I also grabbed a pack to store those items. I had never received one, so I simply requisitioned one from the armory. As for anything else I thought I needed, they were all stashed away in the spatial sack on my arm. With that, we all met up by the gates. In front of it was the crawler Sir Hammett spoke of. It was a vehicle that looked like an armored truck. Inside it had 2 rows of seats along with a magic turret on top. And in the back it had an enclosed cargo trunk. We all threw our bags in the trunk before boarding. I couldn't help but smile as I felt the cold hard metal of its construction. This thing was an inch of armor away from being an APC. The space given to us was nice too. Since people in this world tended to be taller, vehicles were accommodating for that. We wouldn't be cramped in a metal box. Sir Hammett was driving, and after we had all boarded, the truck rolled out of the base. The location for our recon was about 15 miles away. With this truck, it would take around an hour to get there when factoring in all the terrain. So I settled in, next to Umara of course. She hadn't spoken at all this morning, but we had made eye contact several times, which was more than enough to make both of us smile. But I was also sitting next to Vetsman, who was enjoyable to talk to. Right now, he was geared up in plate-armored pants. His chest plate was sitting underneath his seat, and his weapon was undoubtedly stashed in a spatial sack. His torso was covered in a fitted cloth shirt meant for wearing underneath armor, but because it was fitted, it made his muscles bulge. I had a good physique, but this man was simply built larger. A brickshith house, if you will. He was a wall and definitely knew how to use it to his advantage. I nudged him. "Hey, what did you do to get it huge?" Do you eat entire cows for dinner? Ha ha, I'm fortunate enough to have a large diet, yes. I've also trained since I was of age. Most of that training wasn't for the spear or sword, but simple physical training. My family believes that endurance is even more important than weapon skill. Your family? Are you from some kind of knight family? I asked, curious more about the structure of his background rather than his personal origins. I had heard about families in several industries, and they seemed to be similar to entire organizations. Veltzman nodded. It's something like that. My family is a paladin peerage of the church. We have a few branches, but I come from the main branch, surnamed Verga. Oh, a paladin peerage. I nodded, impressed. I had only ever heard of paladins in fantasy, but it seemed they were a real thing here. But I was still curious, so I inquired. What does it mean to be a paladin? Or a paladin peerage? A paladin peerage is simply a noble family within the church that is headed by a paladin. And what is a paladin? All those who are authority 12 under the church become a paladin. Oh, so they're the strongest. I was enlightened and asked another question. So your father is a paladin? Ha ha, no. My great-grandfather was, but he died in the last major war. But he was not the first paladin of our line, and thus we have retained our status as a paladin peerage, hoping to produce another one. I see. Are you going to be the next? If the Lord wills it. Otherwise, I will simply do as I can. Paladins aren't the only people who can influence a war. Every soldier matters, so as long as I bring value to the church, I will continue down my path. Ah, how noble of you. I nodded before suddenly smiling at him. Now tell me how you really feel. Hey now, why would I expose myself? He responded cheekily, causing us to laugh. After that we continued talking to pass the time. Tana and the others chimed in at some point too, spilling details about their families and origins. And soon enough, we started to approach our target area. Chapter 44. At some point the crawler rolled off-road. We tread through some plains before heading up a large hill and finally coming to a stop. Everyone disembarked and scanned the surroundings. There was no immediate threat, but we still had to be wary. The entity we were hunting wouldn't be alone, that much we knew. However, we also didn't know how powerful it was. Since we weren't going in with much intelligence, an extra layer of caution was warranted. But after several minutes of looking around, nothing was found. So we all settled while gathering around Sir Hammett. Alright, here's what we'll do. He took out his aerial, tapping a few times before bringing up a map. From here we need to move down the hill in the direction. While we don't see anything out of the ordinary now, this thing could be hiding in plain sight, so we still need to search some key landmarks. But since we don't have communications all the way out here, we'll all need to go together. I have a suggestion. I suddenly raised my hand, prompting Hammett to turn and stare at me. I spoke. I'm good with long-distance attacks and observation, and this hilltop is perfect for someone like me. I was wondering if it would be better for me to stay here and provide some overwatch for the group. You're the summoner? Yes, sir. I nodded, to which he went silent for a few moments. Very well. You will stay with the crawler and watch us from afar. Understood. I will also need Umara to stay with me for support. The warlock. That doesn't seem optimal. If you get attacked you will need close-range support, so. Sir Hammett looked around, finding and pointing at Tana. She will stay back with you. Are you sure, sir? Umara is already my designated support, and she is not a knight, so she may hold you back while traveling. I spoke back up. While staying back with Umara was partially driven out of my desire to have some alone time, it was also practical. Her auxiliary support was rather critical to ensuring I didn't attract every living thing within a 5-mile radius, including potential enemies. We complemented each other well, even if there was truth to Hammett's statement. But his only response came with a frown. Please don't question my decision. I'm not a knight either and I'll be working just as much. Leaving you here is already enough of a risk. She will stay with you here and neither of you will leave this position until we have returned. Am I clear?" "Yes," I responded dully, my mood having been quickly ruined. "I get it." He was military, I was just a school kid, and I was talking back. He didn't even need to explain himself, but he was being lenient and exercising some patience, even if it was thin. He sure wasn't like that in the briefing room. It amazed me how different he had become in just an hour. Perhaps he was just locked in for the mission, but it still pissed me off. I was glad I was taller, since I was able to look down on him as he tried to seem intimidating while exercising his authority. Eventually he turned away. "Gear up. We're heading out as soon as possible." With those words, everyone else went to go and make final preparations. As they did so though, I went up to them. It was time to test out my aerial's main function, the mobile node. With the built-in program, I was able to create a node on the fly and allow others to connect to it. This wasn't simply something like a website that gave information, but a transceiver that could send and receive data. The transmission range of this aerial was far higher than the standard ones, meaning I could connect to everyone even when they were miles away. And with myself as the medium, they could all maintain contact with each other. So I went over to everyone and helped them connect to my node. It took a few minutes, but before long, everyone was connected and could send messages to each other. I could even create a large group chat, which I did, allowing us to pool our messages. Of course, Hemet wasn't invited. My current mood could basically be summed up with the phrase, "Fuck that guy." Umara also came up to me one last time before leaving, giving me a wry smile. "You didn't have to talk back for me. It wasn't for you, but for everyone. I work best with you. But since that's not happening, we better hope I don't need to step in. Otherwise, any nearby enemies will come flocking. Keep that in mind." "Right. I will." She nodded seriously. Such a thing was a very real possibility and could end badly if not handled properly. With that, the group separated. Vetsman, Fiden, and Umar left with Hemet while Tana and I stayed behind. We watched as they descended the hill. Their first landmark to investigate was actually the side of the hill itself. It was completely covered in scattered rock formations including massive boulders and deep crevices. The entity could be hiding anywhere inside, and they would need to check. Of course, they wouldn't be searching blindly. That's why Hemet was here. Using detection spells, they could scan an area with pulses of mana, greatly accelerating their search speed. They wouldn't be going that far from us at the top. At the least, they would always be within my range. Before finding a rock to perch myself on though, I went around the crawler, taking a peek at the driver's seat. And its layout surprised me. It looked similar to cars on Earth. There was a steering wheel, a key to start it, and pedals on the floor for acceleration and braking. Of course, Hemet didn't leave the key behind, so I unfortunately couldn't play around. Still, it was good to know that vehicles were similar to what I knew. Then again, the design was rather intuitive anyway. Not surprising that it was universal. It was only then that I found a rock, brought out a seat for myself, and got comfortable. Taking out my rifle, I could see the group gradually making their way down the hill through my scope. While doing that, I lifted my aerial and started speaking. "Come in, squad. Comms check. Can you hear me?" "I can hear you." "Me too." "Same here." "Hey, what's that?" I smiled as I heard Hemet's voice through someone else's aerial, speaking again. "Just another form of communication, sir. I'll inform you all if I spot anything out of the ordinary. For now, you're clear. Let me know if you need anything else." "Will do. Good to know my back is being watched." Vetsman smiled while looking back up the hill, waving wands toward us before continuing down. And I could see Hemet's weird face as he wasn't sure what to say. "Yay, that's right, asshole. You didn't get invited to the party." I smiled in petty victory. After that though, we all settled in for the long haul. For me, I just had to hurry up and wait. And since I was watching, Tana decided to kick back and relax. My, how I wished Umara was here. We could be talking and keeping each other company, but our asshole superior decided to get in the way. Well, I wouldn't neglect my job, but I still wasn't happy. And since they were all busy hiking, I couldn't really text her either. How depressing. For about 2 hours I watched them hike down. That was when they reached the bottom of the hill and spread out a bit more. Vetsman stayed with Umara, going one way while Hemet and Fidland went another. They searched all the dozens of crevices and hidden areas, but after an hour, nothing came up. At some point, noon started to come around and the sun started beating down. Thankfully summer had already passed and it was getting cooler, so it was actually a really nice day weather-wise. It was sunny, making everything clear. From my vantage point, I could make out any and all abnormalities. As I looked between the two groups, Tana spoke from beside me. You know, the missions on these trips seem cool for a bit, but then you're forced to sit around for hours and suddenly you wish you had just stayed back at the school. At least with the puppet master we had constant battles. I think real danger tends to make things more exciting, even if most of the time you're just plain bored. I commented back while adjusting my seating position. I had learned over time that staring through an optic could fatigue your eye. So since I first sat down, I had been using my left eye to observe, saving my right eye for when I needed it. I also got nice and stiff when sitting in one position for so long, so I shifted between several different positions on top of my chosen rock. I also stacked my bag full of rations and supplies underneath me, providing some extra cushion. Doing that, Tana and I talked back and forth for a while. We laughed occasionally and simply passed the time. But then, the first interesting thing happened. It wasn't much. Nothing more than a random rock suddenly shifting and falling down the side of the hill. But it immediately caught my attention. My sharp eye, having been trained by video games from Earth to pick out the tiniest and fleeting details in fast-paced shooters, spotted a momentary distortion heading down the hill. It was the slightest warp and light, but it was enough to make my heart thrum with adrenaline. Sure enough, only another second or so of observation and I was able to see the distortion again as it headed toward my squad. I suddenly yelled into the open combs. Enemy contact. Heading towards Vetsman, your right side. In my scope, I watched as Vetsman and Umara instantly turned with my directions. But I wasn't going to trust that they would spot the enemy and risk them getting hurt, so after taking a few seconds to aim, I pulled the trigger with an empowered shot. Asterisk boom asterisk. Asterisk screech. Asterisk. Everyone heard a scream as my bullet tore into the entity. Blood splattered across some rocks as the distorted light flickered even more, outright revealing the enemy. It was a gray beast that looked like a spiked wolf. It had sharp spines along its back and a sleek, thin body. Its abnormally long claws made it look even more vicious as it left streaks across the rocks it jumped along. My bullet had torn accurately through its torso, but it wasn't enough to severely injure it. Plus, after revealing itself, it went berserk. It started running and streaking across the hillside, heading down toward its prey. I couldn't land another shot. But now that they could see it, I had no qualms. Sure enough, Vetsman stepped forward with his tower shield and spear, meeting the beast head-on. They clashed before long, Umara supporting with some debuffing spells from behind that would provide him an advantage. And as it happened, I pulled away from my scope for a moment and looked around. At several other positions along the hillside, I could see some more distortions. More of those beasts came charging, but the more they moved, the easier they were to spot. I spoke into my aerial. Fiden, 3 more enemies coming in behind you. Umara, 1 more to your left. I'm taking my shot. Roger. I heard her voice come back over. At the same time, I took aim at the moving distortion. It was moving slower, perhaps trying to sneak up while its kin was acting as bait. At that moment though, I saw Tana step up. Should I go help? No. Asterisk boom asterisk. I took my shot, hitting the beast and taking it out of stealth. I then looked at Tana. Stay here and check the surroundings over there for me. Tell me if there are any enemies coming. This noise might attract attention. Got it. She didn't hesitate to follow my orders, running off and scanning the landscape around us. While she did that, I continued to watch my squad. Despite having 3 enemies, fighting was fine since Hemet was right there. He cast large area spells to find the enemies, lock them down, and then kill them before fighting could even step in. And since I had shot both of the beasts going toward Vetsman and Umara, they were able to easily handle those fights and finish them off. But even that was less of a pressing concern. After all, they weren't the controlling entities. The boss was still out there, and it was definitely in control of those wolf beasts. Otherwise, they would have appeared sooner. Then, all of a sudden, I felt a chill go down my neck. I instantly responded as the powers of my coat actuated with a purple flash, spinning around while communing with a peacekeeper. Sure enough, I saw a beast running right toward me in slow motion, about to launch forward. Its distortion faded as it jumped, its maws aimed right for my throat. But my pistol came up in time, my barrel only a few feet away from its vicious snout and blood-red eyes when I pulled the trigger. Asterisk bang. Asterisk. The body went limp as my empowered bullet tore straight through its skull, but the body continued straight toward me, falling on top of me. I felt its claws and spines stab me in a few places not covered by my coat. I immediately threw it off, but blood came out as I did so, staining my clothes. Shit. These are nice too. John. Are you okay? Tana came running over, sliding to my side with worry all over her face as if I was going to die. I waved her away. I'm fine. Keep watching out for enemies. Are you sure? Let me get the medkit. No, I got it. How could I not have my own medical supplies on me? I had been injured too many times to count in the trenches, so I had gotten pretty good at packing wounds. Taking out some gauze and wrap, I felt around and stuffed the wounds based on how much it bled. Anything that wasn't pouring was left alone. And after taking care of that, I went right back to work. Sending Tana off, I looked back down, seeing the finished battles. However, even though the wolves were dead, Hemet was still moving. I found the entity. It's running, so I'll chase. You all stay. Just like that, Hemet used magic to give chase. Right after that, I saw a figure running toward a hill opposite to us. I took aim at it, but it was too far to hit. It may only have been 400 or 500 meters away, but that was beyond the effective range of this weapon. This rifle was pre-World War, after all. It wasn't a modern sniper. Besides, Hemet could take care of it. And since he was gone, I took command. Everyone, head back up here and regroup. John. Right as I spoke, Tana suddenly shouted. I had a bad feeling. I see enemies coming toward us. There's a lot. Fantastic. I scowled. You see, Hemet? This is why you listen to me. You think you know how I operate better than I do? You think my judgment was just shit out of my ass? And now there's a horde coming. How wonderful. Everyone, double time. Put the training to work. I shouted while changing positions, setting my sights on the small horde of stray beasts heading toward us from the bottom of the hill. And I opened fire, cursing our stupid commanding officer. Chapter 45. Fiden and Vetsman were quick to ascend the hill. Knights said it easy like that with their ridiculous strength. And Vetsman carried Umara so she didn't get left behind. So before long, we had all regrouped and prepared. Asterisk boom asterisk. The explosions coming from my guns echoed across the landscape. I was shooting as fast as I could, but although most of the beasts were weak, there were plenty of them. And after my squad assembled around me, I paused and took out a cigar, speaking while lighting it. Vetsman, Fiden. You two will take point in front of us. Fiden, support Vetsman. Tana, you're going to support them both. Take care of anything they can't. Understood. They all nodded and moved forward. There was a good amount of space on top of this hill, so they wouldn't have to fight on slip terrain. But all that space left room for beasts to fill. If we weren't careful, we would get surrounded. Well, not like we hadn't faced these scenarios before with the Puppet Master. There were very few times that any of the teams I worked with ever failed, no matter the situation. More often than not, I took command. As the observation specialist, I tended to have a better grasp on the overall situation. Of course, finding people who would trust me in the first place was more of a concern. Thankfully, Vetsman and Fiden took to my orders easily, despite this being the first real time we had ever worked together. Or perhaps it was just how irritated I sounded. Right now, I wasn't in the position where I would take no for an answer. After the knights moved up, I looked toward my trusty warlock. Umara, you're responsible for crowd control. Don't let our vanguard get surrounded. Roger. She nodded and moved up, beginning to cast spells. As for myself, well, my job didn't need to be stated. Climbing on top of the crawler, I got a nice view of everyone's backs as well as the slope down the hill. A rough estimation yielded 100 or 2 beasts. And they weren't all coming in one large group. They were scattered and had no sense of unity, attacking in small waves. By the time I was ready, Vetsman had already made first contact. He greeted the first beast with the tip of his spear, outright skewering it and throwing it away, almost slicing it in half from that action alone. And Fiden followed up by simply slashing a beast across the face when it lunged at him, killing it instantly. That's when I suddenly remembered. Vetsman and Fiden were Authority 5. Only 6 people in the elites were Authority 5, and there were 2 of them. The rest were Authority 4, with myself occupying the boatmost rung. So those 2 had no issue dealing with beasts under their level. They could even fight Authority 5 single quotes head-on, those behemoths I had seen during the siege being some of them. So while an entire army of beasts could overwhelm a single person, that didn't mean the person would fall. It simply meant they would take a bit more time to clear them out. I understood quickly that Vetsman and Fiden didn't need much help. Plus, they had the support of Tana and Umara, who would only make it easier for them to kill faster. And that wasn't to mention me, their Overwatch, who would pick off a few to keep their backs safe. The only issue was, beasts only continued to come. In the distance, I could see faint dots heading toward us. They were still scattered, but there were a lot of them. At least another few hundred by my count. I felt a headache come on even as my cigar worked to alleviate my wounds. If that asshole had only listened. Now I was stuck cleaning up the mess. Taking aim, I decided I could work on my marksmanship here, picking off distant targets. My bullets sailed over the heads of my squad, some bullets missing, others finding their mark. Over time, as I commoned with more weapons, I received the experiences of more people. Sometimes during my training, I would take a dive into the dimensions of my authorities and sift around for more weapons to benefit from. Of course, cursory communions didn't garner that much. I found that the more I used a weapon, the more I would deepen the connection and the more experience I would receive. And so far, I had used this Remington Lee scope rifle quite a bit. My connection with it was deeper than any other gun I had, and the experiences I received from it were invaluable. I wasn't a marksman before coming to this world. Sure, I had some experience shooting guns, but nothing that would make me extraordinary. My aim was decent. That was all I knew. But the experiences from this rifle made me into a proper marksman, someone who could utilize his weapon with adept familiarity. That made this weapon's effective range of 300 meters truly effective in my hands. There was little I would miss unless the target was moving sporadically or was smaller than normal. But I still had much to learn. I wasn't an expert yet, and since guns were my thing, I needed to get very good at them. That included these older variants, even though they may not be as precise or easy to use as the modern ones. And thankfully, I improved as I continued to practice, especially since my mind was improving as my spark grew more powerful. With a sharper mind, I indirectly strengthened my senses and dexterity. Being able to think faster was especially helpful, my reaction times shortening considerably and my ability to make judgments jumping a magnitude. This was all to say that, even right now with only decent marksmanship, I was a damn good shot. Asterisk boom asterisk. Another bullet sailed beside Vetsman's body, instantly killing an incoming beast about 120 meters away. About 2 hours had passed, and right now, I was wholly concentrated, Those 2 hours passed relatively easily. The beasts were constant, but they were never overwhelming. Our group worked well, supporting each other and efficiently killing monsters because of it. I was able to thin out some groups before they even stepped foot onto the hill, so by the time they arrived, they had no choice but to get caught in some of Umara's traps and finished off by Vetsman, Fiden, and Tana one by one. Fiden killed the most by far, while Vetsman was a close second. And Tana, although she didn't kill a lot, did her job very well. She was responsible for watching the surroundings of her allies, not simply finding as many enemies to kill as she could. Her job, like Vetsman's, was protection. She made sure that Fiden could properly support Vetsman, who was acting as the tank, and prevented any beasts from pressuring Umara. So she was constantly moving, providing her extra power where needed to keep the battle favorable. I was beginning to see why she was in the middle ranks. She was fast, meaning she was a great scout. So she didn't kill a lot, but she was still vitally important to make sure things didn't go wrong. After all, if Umara was suddenly pressured, and her auxiliary support for Vetsman disappeared, then he would get overwhelmed and Fiden would be taxed trying to help. It would lead to a catastrophic breakdown in formation which would only spiral into dire consequences. So even without me here, Tana was enough to balance the battle. They didn't need me at all. But I was here, and the role I played could be described as such. Pure firepower. My job was to deal as much damage as possible without getting in the way. In fact, I didn't even need to observe much. That was technically Tana's job. And commanding the team could also technically be left to Vetsman. I was simply sheer killing power added on top of the team's skill set. I knew that well and wasn't under the delusion that I could do any more than that. So I wanted to get good at my job, because although I was technically only extra power, I could also dictate the flow of a battle. I could make victories absolute and turn losses into wins. I could save lives and dampen casualties. So I wasn't needed, but I was self-aware enough to know that my power would be desired in any team and all battles. And expectations would be placed upon me because of that, expectations that would bear the weight of not just victory, but the lives of those around me. So lacking skill in the only job I had wasn't allowed. I had to become a master at what I did as soon as I could do so. I had to improve at every step, using the experiences I gained at every level of power to better myself. Asterisk boom asterisk. I fired, catching a glimpse of the dead beast on the other end before shifting my sights to another. My hand chambered another round, the bolt sliding smoothly along its chamber and slotting in another bullet. My eye maintained visual through the scope the entire time, allowing me to quickly acquire my next target and fire again. And as my concentration peaked, I stopped noticing how much time had passed. I simply continued to fire. Until, at some point, there were no more enemies to kill. Everything went silent all at once, my gun being the last thing to sound. I lifted my head, looking at my squad ahead of me. They looked rather tired, as was I, but the surrounding piles of corpses showed just how much fruit our effort bore. Doing one last scan, I couldn't spot any other beasts coming toward us. With that, I finally relaxed. We did it. Tana cheered, her armor coated in blood. In fact, everyone was except for Umara and I. Killing so many beasts was bound to paint some things red. The others smiled, looking between each other. How is everyone? Any wounds? None here. Nope. I'm all right. After Vetsman asked, everyone shook their heads. I was the only one not to though. Having been reminded and with my tunnel vision fading, all the pain of my wounds set in again. They weren't bad, just a bunch of shallow stab wounds and some lacerations. My cigar and the healing had stopped all the bleeding and would ensure I wasn't in any real danger. But it still hurt like hell, and I had been laying on top of the crawler for hours. Combined with the exhausting target practice, I didn't feel like I could move. I groaned. I could actually use some help. Oh, right. John's hurt. What? With Tana's shout, everyone came rushing over. Vetsman directly jumped up onto the crawler and checked me out. I waved when he landed next to me. I'm fine, Just some wounds from that wolf beast earlier. I got poked. Your clothes are bloody. Wait, you've had these for that long? Well, not like I was going to sew them up on the spot. I took care of what I needed to. Here, just get me down. I put my hand out, prompting Vetsman to take it and help me up. He helped me down the crawler and sat me down inside of it. Shining a light on my front side revealed my nice white shirt entirely red with blood, along with my pants despite it being a bit less obvious. It wasn't the first time I had gone so long without treatment, but unfortunately it only got more painful the more time passed without it getting at least cleaned and patched. It felt like my entire body was sore, every movement causing shooting pains to hit my limbs. I had basically caught a porcupine with how many sharp spines and claws that wolf had. It was only natural I was injured. What I was more pissed about was how Sir Hammett still had yet to return. Where the hell is our lovely commanding officer? I have no clue. He ran off and has yet to show up. Hopefully he is back before the sun sets. He better be. Shit, I need to get sewn up. I cursed while stripping my coat and shirt. Looking at my bare chest revealed several wounds across my torso, some of them long slices, and others being slender punctures. They had all clotted, and my cigar alleviated some pain, but not all of it. I let out a plume of smoke while looking up, glancing at Amara who was cringing while looking closer. She saw my gaze and asked, "Are you really okay? Do you need anything from the medkit?" "I'm fine. I just need a doctor." "Hey, why don't we all eat since we're stuck waiting?" "Fiden, you mind pulling out the rations?" "Sure." Fiden's face brightened at the mention of food, gladly going to fetch a bag of supplies. We all pulled out some rations and started chewing. After many hours of fighting, we were all hungry. However, I also used this opportunity. Nudging Fiden with my elbow and nodding toward Vetsman, I asked, "Do you guys mind watching for Sir Hammett on top of the crawler? I was thinking about laying down in here." "Oh, sure thing. Tana, could you go with them?" "HM." Tana lifted her head in confusion, her mouth full of food. That's when I saw the two men go into thought. Vetsman was the first to smile widely as he looked between me and the only person I wasn't sending out. Fiden quickly understood as well, though he seemed more surprised than anything. As for Tana, well, it seemed she was as dense as she was innocent. Vetsman grabbed Tana, pulling her. "Let's go, Tana." "Huh? We all need to watch." "Yes. All three of us can keep track of every angle if we sit in a circle." "But why?" "Just go." Vetsman no longer asked as he dragged Tana out. Then, the crawler was left empty, light shining through the windows. Stuffing the last of my food in my mouth, I suddenly turned and laid down. My head landed on Amara's lap. I looked up, seeing her looking down at me with an embarrassed face. "Could you be more obvious?" "Hey now, I wasn't lying. I really do want to lay down. My body is killing me." "On my lap though. Seeing a pretty girl like you helps alleviate my pain." "Oh." She smiled weirdly and looked up to hide her face from me. How cute. It was fun seeing her all flustered, especially knowing how she would get me flustered with all those prying questions. As she dodged my goofy grin though, I had a thought and adjusted my head a little. Because she was almost always wearing some robes, her figure wasn't all that obvious. I knew she definitely wasn't as curvy as Rayla, but even just looking up at her from the vantage point of her lap, I had a good portion of my vision blocked by her chest. It was just a cursory observation. I wasn't so picky even if I had preferences, definitely not enough so to diminish my thoughts about her. Still, I was a guy, and she seemed to be a sleeper. I couldn't help but click my tongue with impression. Plus, I couldn't seem to get over her ashy gray hair. Like Rayla's, it was an exotic color that mesmerized me. It was amazing to think it was completely natural. Not only that, but when I looked into her eyes, I found a deep purple that looked almost black. I hadn't really paid attention before, but they were beautiful. "You look good too." Suddenly, I heard Umara mumble, her eyes darting over to my body beside her. "You're not a knight, but you're strong." "Oh, thank you. Is there a reason you work out?" I know it's good for you, but usually only knights need to keep themselves in good shape. Everyone else really only needs to be able to run. I think it's a matter of principle for me. I answered while thinking back. Ever since coming to this world, I definitely hadn't worked out as much. The city and magisterium definitely had gyms though, and there were even sports, though I didn't know any of them and didn't have the time to watch much. So I wasn't in the shape I was when I first came here. However, there was one thing that surprised me after a while. Given several months, I should have lost a good amount of muscle mass and weight after not working out for a while, my stamina dropping into the gutter, my muscles becoming less cut, and my metabolism coming to a halt. But very little of that stuff happened. I retained my shape rather well and my stamina no longer dropped to nothing within a week of no activity. I still ate a lot and felt just as strong as I was. I chopped it down to simply a consequence of being in this world. Perhaps the magic of this world brought that kind of benefit inherently, or maybe it was a benefit of being a magus. I didn't know, but I wouldn't argue with the results. Still, I did still do some workouts a few times a week. Hell, the Puppet Master's scenarios doubled as fantastic cardio. And I did so not to become stronger, but to simply not get weaker. I would work out regardless of where I was in life. Keeping in shape was good for me both physically and mentally, as it was for everyone. I wouldn't forsake that, especially when considering what I now did. I explained this to Umara, who nodded while listening. I see. That's good. Not that we have a choice sometimes. True. Sometimes those scenarios are nothing but a running workout. I think the Puppet Master makes us do those on purpose. Yeah, yay. And you? What do you do to keep yourself fit? Or are you just naturally built this way? I poked her stomach, feeling what seemed to be some pretty tight abs. She giggled and blocked me. I don't do much, just some basic workouts. Even warlocks need to take care of themselves. I definitely don't have abs like yours. Saying that, I felt Umara's hand move over and brush my belly with her fingers. My brows raised as she continued to stare a bit, but then, she frowned as her finger grazed the skin around one of my wounds. They look bad. You've got a lot of scars too. Are you really okay? I'm fine. They are just sore. I'll be better once we finally get back to base. Saying that, I went quiet and shifted a bit, relaxing even further. Ah, how soothing. I smiled while nestling into Umara's lap a bit more. I heard her chuckle when I did, and then I felt some fingers run through my hair. Is this girl actually petting me? I felt her fingers comb my hair and straighten it out, her fingernails scratching my scalp. I felt tingly as she did that. Now I really was completely relaxed, almost enough to go to sleep. This went on for a while as she got more comfortable with what she was doing. I felt like I never wanted it to end. How unfortunate that I was hurt, otherwise I would be doing more than just laying on her lap. I felt a bit selfish being the only one getting treatment, but when I opened my eyes and looked at her, we both met with a smile. She seemed to be enjoying herself. That's when I heard the dreaded announcement. Sir Hammett is back. Chapter 46. Vetsman pounded on the crawler, his voice acting like a douse of cold water. My eyes opened as I frowned, looking straight up toward the ceiling. It took me a few seconds to mentally prepare myself, my mood worsening just thinking about Hammett. Fine. I got up, feeling my wounds get aggravated as I stood and cracked my neck. Umar got up with me, the two of us silent as I exited the crawler. Since I was shirtless and it was becoming evening, I was hit with a cool breeze that gave me goosebumps. But it felt good despite that, so I took some deep breaths to calm myself down. Vetsman looked at me with a smile, which turned a bit as I saw him check me out. That's a lot of wounds. And scars. Comes with the job. So where is he? Over there. He pointed, and I saw a figure on an opposing hillside making its way toward us. He wasn't running or making any kind of haste, so it would be a while before he actually got here. I tapped Vetsman and pointed. Hey, you mind going over there and checking on him? We should make sure our commanding officer isn't horribly wounded. Sure. He nodded before bounding over there. I saw him traverse the entire distance in less than a minute, arriving by Hamet's side. They stopped and spoke to each other, and as they did so, I lifted my aerial to my mouth, speaking into the group channel. "Vetsman, ask if we can get the keys for the crawler. I can drive it over." There was no response as they discussed for a little while longer. Then, I saw Hamet hand something over to Vetsman before he came running back. I looked over to Tana, Umara, and Fiden. "Load up. We're leaving." "Roger." They moved with haste, packing everyone and loading into the vehicle. Then Vetsman arrived, handing the keys to me. "He's wounded. Do you really know how to drive that thing?" "You mean they don't teach you?" And I thought I was the uneducated one. "Gimme." I grabbed the keys from Vetsman, smiling as I jumped into the driver's seat. The key wasn't a normal key. Instead, it was a keycard-type object that you could slot into a holder next to the steering wheel. I threw it in, following the obvious patterns to point it straight, and watched as the dashboard glowed and the vehicle started. There were some mechanical parts on this crawler that generated some vibrations, so I could tell when it was ready to ride. Like that, I placed my hand on a stick located where the center console would be. From watching Hamet drive, I knew that these cars only had 2 gears, one for drive, and one for reverse. It was magically driven, so it was more similar to electric cars than gas cars. With that, I tapped the gas pedal, feeling the crawler move forward and instantly getting a feel for its power. Alright, here we go. My first time driving in this world started without a hitch. Spinning the car around, I found a clear path and drive down, encountering some mild turbulence but nothing that would flip us as I made my way toward Hamet's figure. Before long, I pulled right up to his side. He was sitting down on a rock, some of his clothes a bit bloody and very obviously injured. I poked my head out and flicked my head toward him. "Get in." When the sun finally set, we arrived back at base. I rolled directly through the open gates, skidding to a halt over the dirt ground. After that I jumped out, a smile on my face. That was fun. It was more powerful than I thought. Ugh, oh god. Tana stumbled out of the crawler, as did Umara and Vetsman. Fiden seemed to be alright though. I didn't mind them and looked at the clock. Turned in our drive into a 30-minute drive. Pretty damn good. You don't know how to drive. Sir Hamet mumbled as he almost fell from the crawler. But I rebuked. "Please, I'm one of the best." We almost died. No way. I always had control. We drove sideways. It's called drifting, and it was intentional. I continued to quip back as everyone critiqued me. The road back was hardly a road, just a dirt trail that hadn't been tread in a while. So it wasn't super smooth, but we were in a truck, so we were fine. There was also a speedometer, and even at my fastest there was still 40 on the dash. Considering the highest speed was around 100 miles per hour, I wasn't going that fast. But I suppose since most people in this world weren't used to driving, they found it a bit rougher than normal. I was taking it easy too since I'm still hurting. Right, I should head to the doctor. Bleg. As I walked off, I heard some weird noises behind me. But I ignored it. I seriously needed to get my body taken care of. After arriving at the medical bay, I was seen by a doctor who checked me in and started fixing me up. The man was quick and efficient. After giving me one of their stronger healing pills, he went to work on sewing me up. I lay there for close to an hour as he worked. We talked about my cigars as well, him telling me that he had only seen them a few times in his life since they were apparently rare and valuable. I didn't reveal much, but the fact that I had a case full of them was rather telling. Still, unlike Umara, he didn't pry and only told me that they were a good thing to have. With that, I was taken care of and released. Since it was night, I caught up with my squad and ate some dinner before retiring. The next few days weren't as eventful. Sir Hamet had been successful in killing the commanding entity, and while we had been forced to fend off a small army in the process, it was nothing that needed to be stressed about since nobody had gotten too hurt. Still, When I was called in for a debrief with an officer, my displeasure in regard to certain decisions on Sir Hammett's part was made known. Not that it would do anything, but I liked knowing that my feelings on the matter were officially documented. So our mission was wrapped up. Since I had gotten hurt and there were plenty of other teams that could use the work, we wouldn't have another mission for a while. And even if there was a mission for us to complete, it wouldn't be anything like killing a commanding entity. Plus, since we had cleared out the surrounding several miles of scourge beasts, there wouldn't even be search and destroy missions. We had effectively made the rest of our trip boring. It was quite unfortunate for the other teams. But that didn't mean we weren't active. I, especially, had work on my plate. For one, I needed to study and cultivate that advancement formation. Maxwell was expecting me to have completely comprehended it by the time I got back, so I needed to work on that. Although, I had already cultivated half of it. He had said that I would be able to grow my spark as I managed to complete more of it, the two going hand in hand since I had made the spark in the first place. Normally one would need to comprehend the entire thing before gradually forming the spark afterward. So since I had deviated from the normal path, the timeline was probably different. Shorter or longer, I didn't know. All I knew was that the deeper I went, the more difficult the formation became. The entire formation was a huge instruction set for Isekai to follow. By following the formation I had, a spark would be created. However, the formation on the paper didn't match the formation when actually applied. Well, it did but didn't. The formation given to me was a guide. By mimicking the shape of the lines with my Isekai and aura, I was able to glean the true shape and get the correct formation. The reason the formation on paper wasn't technically correct was because the shapes drawn with Isekai during cultivation weren't something that could be put on paper. It was similar, but also completely different. So I had to remember the true shape of the formation, as well as constantly study the parts that only continued to get more complicated. I was lucky to comprehend so much in my dreams, getting inspired from time to time. But I still needed to study the formation if I wanted to take advantage of dreaming at all. So for a couple hours each morning and night, I would study the formation. Although using aura and Isekai was novel at first, studying still got boring. I wasn't able to spend 6 hours a day just sitting down and printing formations like a computer. Plus, I also wasn't forsaking productivity during the rest of the day. The others in my squad also had things to do. Fiden, Vetsman, and Tana were all knights who trained their bodies in martial arts. So they would be found on the fields going through their own routines or sparring. Since they were in a squad, they often sparred each other. Umara also studied spells since she was a warlock, and that was on top of her advancement formation. Warlocks were considered isolated researchers for a reason. They may not emerge from a room for half the day simply because their training was comprised entirely of studying and more studying. There wasn't as much practical training. As for myself, other than studying the formation, I also worked with my summons. That practice was basically either shooting or searching for more guns to shoot. After finding the Remington Lee modified sniper, there wasn't anything else that really caught my eye. I had done a lot of searching, but all I found were swaths of lever actions, revolvers, and the occasional double-barrel shotgun. There wasn't much variation and the power of those spirits wasn't outstanding, nothing that would compel me to change my current selections. I had a long rifle, a shotgun, and a pistol. That was all I really needed and ended up using. So until I found an outstanding weapon variant, there wasn't much reason to spend a lot of time searching. That just left shooting practice. For this I went to the puppet master who got me permission to do what I wanted. After he talked to Commander Bosnan, I was given the authority to go wherever along the walls and shoot. So I picked a nice secluded spot and got to work. On the east side of the base, there was a tree line that led into a forest about 200 meters away. It was the tree line that I used for target practice. I picked some trees that stood out and started. Some trees stuck out from the forest and some were deeper in. I picked several across varying distances and simply opened fire. My gunshots were heard across the entire base, but I had gotten permission, so it was fine. For a few hours I simply shot regular bullets. I would riddle one tree with bullet holes before moving on to another, my goal being to keep my grouping tight. The scope on this rifle wasn't modern, so there was no such thing as adjustment dials. That meant I had to gauge the distance with my eye and adjust my shot accordingly. For shorter distances closer than 500 meters or so, that was fine. But pushing any farther than that would require a bit more precision, not to mention this rifle wasn't even accurate past 300 meters. Regardless of my target though, I sought tight groupings and consistency. I even pushed myself and bit and tried to shoot down some birds that flew by. I never hit one, but I still tried. So I spent several hours of my day behind a rifle. I also didn't forsake my peacekeeper, but since I couldn't go outside the walls by myself, there wasn't much practice I could get with it other than practicing my reloading after fanning the hammer into the distance, seeing how many rounds I could fire in a minute. And when I wasn't doing anything productive at all, I was doing one of two things. Eating or flirting with Umara, sometimes both. Since we could talk to each other via aerial, we would find times to meet and hang out. And when we weren't together, like during the night after curfew, we would be texting. And during that, I couldn't help but feel a weird sense of novelty. Umara would text back within seconds. The only time spent without a response was the time it took for her to read the words and then type back a response and hit send. There was very little deviation from that. Which was nice, because back on Earth, it definitely wasn't like that. With relationship experience came both good and bad points, and it was never fun being interested in a girl who would play as if dating was a game. Seeing a message when it was sent, but only texting back several minutes later because doing so in a timely manner may be seen as desperate, needy, or whatever other negative trait they came up with, was common with some girls. And it was something I hated. But here on this world, where texting was barely a thing and the social standards were different, there was none of that. Of course, I hadn't been around on this world for long and had only had a relationship with 2 women, but the difference was so stark that it could be taken as the standard, even if there were outliers. When I texted Umara, she simply responded. How great was that? And our conversations seemed to go on endlessly, both via text and in person. We would tell stories, spill some harmless secrets, talk about family and all the quirks we loved and hated. It was all so fresh. Talking with her made me feel light. Although it was a new relationship and that made me a bit blind, every moment with her felt fun. I think the best part of it all was how she had come on to me first. It was clear that she liked me and I made it clear that I liked her. There was no suspense, and that made everything flow so smoothly. Neither of us had to be reserved out of fear, every interaction and moment of intimacy advancing our relationship forward. It was so different from everything I had experienced on Earth, which made it even more enjoyable. In fact, it was so enjoyable that the days flew by quicker than I could keep up with. Before I even realized, the end of our trip approached. Tobe continued,